also to the other people here at Aptos, Steve and Pat and Ellie and Surrounding Soul. Done a great job of helping to get this exhibition together, and it looks I'm really pleased with the way it's turned out. And thank you all for coming as well and having a listen. I thought first I'd just make a few general comments about how I got to painting these particular type of paintings, which have been called Spangle paintings. What I'm going to say is largely an expansion of a blurb that is available downstairs if you want to have a read of it afterwards. Then I thought we'd go around and have a look at maybe 5 or 6 of the paintings and look at them in more detail, and perhaps talk about some of the technical issues that came up with the paintings, and you may have some questions about those works more specifically. And then also I just invite everyone to interrupt with questions if you'd like to probe me on some of the stuff that I'm going to be saying. I thought I'd start here by outlining 2 of the processes that have led me to these paintings. First is the problem of difference between the reality of what we see in front of us, just a normal view of what is before us in everyday life. The difference between that and the way that can be represented in art. So the reason I'm interested in that is because I see it as a window to the processes that everyone uses, not just artists, to make sense of what they're seeing, and even just to grasp the reality of the visual world in front of them. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was how I've been trying to make these paintings function and work outside the influence of my personal presence. So how to make the paintings communicate or express something that is shared or general experience. So I wanted to make these paintings operate at the level of image to viewer rather than artist to viewer. So the way that they are affecting a person who's looking at them, then it's beyond them thinking about what my intents are and what my processes are, I suppose. So just going back to the first point, I used to paint non-abstracted art or semi-abstracted art, and quite simply one day was looking at a view down a street and wondering how I might paint that view, and realised that what I was doing in my mind was altering what I was looking at in order to be able to try to paint it. So I was reorganising it. What I was seeing was complex, and too complex really to paint. So I was going through visual, perceptual and mental processes just in order to grasp what was in front of me in a very basic way, and applying processes in my mind to be able to understand what was in front of me. So simplification was one of the things. You kind of you reduce the noise of what's in front of you. You frame it, so you take things out that you're not perhaps focused in on or are not important to what you're trying to see. And so processes like that, deleting parts, highlighting other parts of what's in front of you. And then I extended that process, or awareness of that process of looking down a street, to just very mundane visual fields like a kitchen table, for instance, or a dashboard of a car, or any visual field in front of you is incredibly complex thing, and there's a lot of sort of noise and buzz about that. And I wondered how we represent that reality to ourselves in our consciousness, just in everyday lives. First of all, we simplify it. But I think also there's another side to that simplification, which is that we actually, we sometimes, well, after a time, we create in our heads templates which are very simple patterns of what we have seen and experienced and memorised and are familiar with, and that when we overlay those simpler patterns of experience onto more complex reality, and then play the two off against each other to try and live in it, come to grips with it, to move through it. It's quite simple actions that we do in just our everyday lives. And it's possible as well that these templates could be instinctive, so passed on genetically from generation to generation. And I think that's one of the ways that we deal with the complexity of our visual fields. It was while painting really that I became aware of this. So this was not an intellectual exercise. It was something that I thought about as I was making the paintings. So I became interested in how I could explore how we as people see and relate to the world, and how I could make an image or object that could somehow activate the looker, so sort of energise the viewer of the work to kindle their curiosity, perhaps excite a sense of wonder, and even present testable theories that the viewer could question and perhaps feel motivated to investigate. So I wasn't interested in showing how and what I personally saw, but in producing images that triggered people looking at them to look back at themselves, to their own ways of seeing, and the processes that they use in trying to come to grips with their visual reality, and that we all use in dealing with reality on a day-to-day basis. So that was, that's kind of the more general, some of the more general processes that are going on. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? I just thought I'd just quickly go back over some of the stylistic changes, I suppose, that I've been through in the last 8 or 10 years, because I think it might help us to see what is perhaps going on in these Spangle paintings. So up until around about 2005 or thereabouts, I'd been painting pictures that were semi-abstractions. There were forms in the pictures that people could identify as maybe that's a face, maybe that's a landscape. And I showed some of these in my very first show up here at Aptos, which was in 2005. And these was kind of organic and gestural pictures. But I was quite keen not long after that to move on, because I found those pictures to be quite insular. They were pictures about my personal view of the way things present themselves to me personally. The paintings themselves were made by building up relations within the painting itself, so it's sort of you make a mark and then you make another mark that kind of interacts with that mark, and you build it and build it and build it. And so the painting is self-referential, it's inward looking. And I was more interested in exploring my relation with the external world, the outside world, and that to me seemed a lot more interesting and challenging. So I started painting non-organic shapes and taking out gesture to some extent, and taking out myself from the paintings if I could. And this was a sort of an extended process. It started by painting circles or targets, and I was painting two, one next to the other, One was a copy of the other image. So that was a tactic to depersonalise. There was nothing special about either one. One was just a copy of the other. It was also a little bit of an investigation into order, natural processes such as reproduction. But I ended up with two almost identical circles or targets next to each other, side by side on a horizontal plane. And it was pretty much 90% of people saw them as eyes. So there was and the other 10% saw them as breasts. And so there was an immediate failure to exclude that connection with real things in front of us. So I tried arranging them one on top of the other instead of side by side. And that did solve some of the issues, but then they looked like the mole's balls. But anyway, there was always a problem with the targets because of Jasper Johns and his very famous paintings of targets. And it's very hard to paint a target without people relating the work back to him. Although for me that was not what I was interested in at all, and to me it was just a coincidence. But nevertheless, I was pushed to move away from that. So I started painting squares instead of circles. I guess the notion of using circles and squares is these are non-natural forms to some extent. These are human inventions, these shapes and forms. And so I was sort of withdrawing the work from that relation with external reality. So with the squares I did copies again. So I had one square next to another, basically trying to make one almost like, well, make it identical to the one next to it, but they never were identical, and that in itself was interesting. And the squares were nice because you put them on a page, or you put them on the paper or the medium, and a square sits very inertly on a visual field, because visually, I think it probably draws our attention back to the fact that if you've got a cube on the ground, it's very hard to move it. You can't roll it. You can't do it. It sits there and is a very stable shape. So that sort of was brought into the paintings. There was a play between them being read as windows as opposed to being read as blocks. So were you looking through them, or were they something in front of the ground behind them? So there was still that problem though. They're read as windows or blocks, so these paintings were still paintings of something. And I was trying to move away from that. So I started painting stripe paintings. And the first stripe paintings that I was painting were coloured stripes. So there was a number of colours that were part of each painting. And I was pleased at the start with that because those paintings I thought were more completely abstract. They weren't of anything, they were stripe paintings. And so there was some success, I thought, with those paintings. But one of the things I was trying to do with those was to kind of take out any notion of ground and figure. So no forward and back, it's just all on the surface. And the way that was achieved, if it was achieved, was by value of each of the stripes. So the value in terms of its width, its tone and its colour, and whether that combination of stripes in that particular painting sort of evened out, so that not one stripe was more important than any of the others, was more forward than any of the others, or more back than any of the others.
And I was going to say, Ben, with that work though, that I think when I observed it, because Ben had these great 5 metre works that are incredible, but it was almost like it curved, you know what I mean? Like the actual work, it was, even though it was straight and it was just those sort of value systems, the illusion that came was like that it warped out. It was it was very cool, like to sort of experience that visual perception as you walked along the work.
Yeah, they were the paintings where I took out colour. So that was the next step. So I was trying, and the reason I took out the colour was because the coloured stripe paintings were, it was based on my value judgments, and I wanted to get that out. I wanted to take that out. So I just started doing the black and white and black and yellow. And so that was the next step. And in making those simpler paintings, I started using systems. So very simple, basic systems like white, black, next one. And then making another rule that I used was that no stripe, the next stripe that was to be painted could not be the same as the preceding stripe. It either had to be thicker or thinner. So what happened there was that visually in the end that you got that kind of waviness to it, but it was an unpredictable end. And that was the really lovely thing about using systems, because you applied these rules and you never were quite sure how it would turn out. And so at the end of the process of applying the system, you'd finish with the painting and look at it and go, wow, that kind of wobbles. You know, it wasn't intended, it was an unpredictable result. So that was really a liberating thing about the systems. It's interesting the way that works. You know, you apply, you restrict yourself, and it's liberating. So anyway, there was the other thing that was nice for me about the stripes was that it took out a technical problem that the type of paint that I use it puts up to me. It's a very fluid paint, and it's watery paint, and I paint with the medium on the wall. So you're using watery paint, you put it on, it drips. It's always falling down and dripping over the painting. So when you're painting squares and circles, you paint, and you've got to go back and take those drips out. Well, you don't have to, but I was trying to reduce that accident and that sort of thing in the pictures, so I had to go back and take them out. With the stripe paintings, if it dripped, it just dripped down the stripe, so it didn't matter. It's made life a lot easier for me, so I was happy about that. So those long paintings were. The other thing about those was that they were long, and you had your eye, and even the big ones that I showed at Wright Square that were 5 metres long, you had to sort of almost walk from one end of the painting to the other to take it in. So it was a narrative thing, and that was deliberate because I've always loved comic strips and that visual thing of a comic strip and a story being told. So I was sort of playing around with that. But I wanted to break that up as well. I started making some paintings where there were blocks of stripes that were vertical and then horizontal, and then vertical and then horizontal. Still applying the systems, very basic systems. Start with black, yellow, black, just until you got to the end. And those paintings were effective to some extent as well, especially in terms of predictability of the outcome of the image. It was even more unpredictable. The stripes really, I guess, is reasonably predictable. Paint black and white, and you end up with the striped paintings. But the key paintings, as I called these ones, where I mixed them between horizontal and vertical stripes, the outcome at the end was even more unpredictable than the stripes, and so that, to some extent, was a successful thing to do. But then I became, I wanted to make a work, or works that could be grasped in their entirety in one sort of hit. So that you looked at them and that you got the whole thing in one. It was like a fact, or it was like a solid kind of experience. It wasn't something that took time and where some things relate to others. It was straight away, it was there. So I made the horizontal and vertical stripe painting into a square format. That was sort of an uninteresting painting, and then I thought I'll jumble up the blocks of stripes, not just into verticals and horizontals, but diagonals as well, and that's what these are. These are the paintings where sections of stripes have been jumbled up and presented. So it was, it was sort of the first ones were very small. There's one under the stairs, downstairs, and I painted that, and I thought, well, that's really I thought it was a successful work. It was energised. It was full of incident. It was a work that you could take in. It was sort of self-contained. To me, it really worked, and so I did a couple more little ones. Then I did some big ones, which this is probably one of the first ones that I did. And I was still applying the systems to these paintings, and it was easy painting. It was good because I'd come across this way of doing things that it seemed to me it was almost fail-proof. I could just draw it, paint it, and then I'd be surprised and sort of half amazed by how it all worked out. And so it was a fun process to go through. And there were quite a few paintings that were painted that were very similar, although I thought they all had their own character. But it did reach a point where I thought, this is ridiculous, I'm just really painting the same painting over and over again. And also the predictability starts to get taken out of it. You start to actually, like the unpredictability starts to get taken out of it. You can actually then sometimes start to see, okay, if I do this, that's going to look like this. Whereas when I first started doing it, I had no idea how it would turn out. And also I was starting to realise that when I was applying my little simple systems to the way I was painting these pictures, there were sections of the pattern that the systems that I was using didn't give me the answer to what colour that particular section of the painting should be. And I realised that I'd been kind of coming across those parts of the pattern and intuitively picking the colour that could be. So it might have, say in a black and yellow painting, there's confusion with the systems whether it should be a black or a yellow part of the painting. And I just said, I'll make it black. it'll be all right. And I'll just keep going.
Based on your first judgments in terms of like our perceptual reality and how we're judging that, that's an interesting point in itself, isn't it? That at some point we're making judgments that then affect our reality or affect the outcome of something.
Yeah.
You know, so it's an interesting thing that even if you're trying to remove yourself at some level, that still engages with that process. Like as a viewer, as an artist, as a spectator in life, that you know, our decisions kind of flow on in terms of that, and don't always follow our rules. We break our rules.
Yeah, we break the rules, and the rules. Then you change your rules as
and
well.
It takes you somewhere else.
Yeah. So that's right. It's fascinating, really, and it came back to me as well, wanting to distance myself away from them and create pictures with rigour. So I started painting these conflictual areas with. I started notating them by painting them a different colour to what the original patterns were. And that kind of worked. It broke up the pattern and created a little bit more interest, and even sort of forms start to emerge from the picture. But the trouble with it is that once you start applying more rules engender their own rules again, because in the simple case of these pictures, you come to a part of the picture where the systems that you're using don't work. You notate that part of the picture, and then you've got to move on to the next part, and then what do? So say for instance there's a part of the painting that could have been black or yellow, you paint it red. Is the next one black because black missed out, and so you push it along? Or does black miss out altogether and then you go yellow? So you've got to think up a new rule. And you end up with these rules, lots of them. It's ridiculous. I've seen some art quite good art, where that's happened. Where an artist called Kerry Polinis makes artworks by getting assistants to follow instructions, and they're really nice artworks. But the problem, well, I didn't realise there was a problem, but when I saw one of her works, there was a book of instructions next to it, how to do it. It was 45 or 50 pages long, A4, all these rules that you had to follow just to make this quite simple construction. So that notion of following rules, I got sick of that, and thought, I've just got to make my own decisions about this and be comfortable with it and easy with it, and move on. So I did. I gave up using the rules and not so much fudge things, but I think if it's black next to black, it doesn't matter. I'll just keep going. And so that was where I got to with that. And then just finally, I started. Quite early on, I started seeing these paintings as having an element of space in them. So that when you looked at them, they were very sort of spatial to me, defined space. And I thought, I'll see if that can actually be extended to a tighter fit with reality. So I constructed artificial landscapes using these stripes, and it's actually, I thought, well, first of all, I wondered if I could do it. Then I did it. It was quite simple, and then I even did it over the top of photographs, and that worked quite quickly. It wasn't difficult to do. But I guess it was a very literal reading of it all, and so I backed away from that literal reading, but still kept kind of accentuating the space of these striped paintings, which is more where these black and white smaller ones come in, and perhaps this one here as well, where the sort of the bigger stripes perhaps look more forward, and this kind of the finer stripes recede. So that basically got me to 2013. There's lots more I could say, but that's pretty much that's enough.
I was just going to ask then, it's interesting looking at your canvas works or your work on board as opposed to the work that's on paper and framed. And in terms of that perceptual self and engaging with rules and things like that, I think it's very interesting there's a reflective quality in this large work, and that then reflects the viewer back to the work as well. And I find that quite a fascinating thing, because you've chosen not to do a lot of work that you like to frame your work. Did you want to discuss a little bit more about that? Or?
Well, the paper work, I've always been ambivalent about the glass in front of it. Was plastic perspex actually, that side it has to be. The paint and the paper is a very absorptive surface, and if it's left without anything in front of it, to me it kind of breathes more the atmosphere that it's in. Very much more so than oil paint, which is like a skin. You know, it's, oil is a skin on canvas or a board. So that was. I'm not sure whether I have to put the paper, the plastic in front of the work because of the nature of it, but it was not an intention to reflect it back. In fact, it's probably the opposite. But yeah, I hope it still does what it does. What
I think it does, because it's immersing. Like when you come into this space, you're immersed by your work. So when we were hanging, it was quite thrilling, but it was also, when I first got here, it was like, well, you know, there's an energy. They're quite, you know, it's not that you're looking at the reflection, it invites you to look beyond the reflection, but I think it reminds you that there's a perceptual rules going on within the work as well, and you're asking people to sort of how they frame their existence, or how they template it out, or how they sort of make those judgments in terms of judging what they're seeing and viewing. And I think that adds to that storytelling rather than diminishes from it. I think it's quite an interesting point of difference. But it is interesting to observe the different qualities that you get from a framed work as opposed to a non-framed work. They're both nice. There's nothing wrong with that.
The size things is very different too. These are the bigger works, sort of it's more bodily, I suppose, whereas the smaller works you sort of zone in very much sort of mentally, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. Does anyone got any questions? Yes, Rita.
Yes, Ben. To me, the red lines through a lot of works, and I see in some cases black, but often the red has a very remote quality in massive black and white, or yellow in black, and it adds a whole other dimension of vision.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could explain the significance of that, and also not only the colour, but also the way it's been painted, it's a lot of personality to me.
Yeah, the red, it's, I guess, going back to painting those stripe paintings, the original vertical stripe paintings, I was always keen to have a very active edge on the stripe, and I think the red gives that active edge. I guess it as well as just a personal thing about the drawing as well. They're drawn with red, and then painted. The drawing is painted, and then it's coloured in or painted up. But I think the red is. I think it does two things. One, it activates the edge. It makes it lively. And secondly, I think it kind of holds the thing together. It's like a frame. It's a framework that holds it together. And I think they're the two main things. There's physicists say that the edges are red. Light bends and lengthens as it goes around the edge of an edge. That wasn't specifically an intent that I was pushing, but it's something I noticed, I suppose.
For me, it's almost like there's something behind the paintings as well, like there's something that's coming through or poking through at certain little points, that it's quite evocative in that way, that you're not just looking at one surface, that there's other surfaces to look at, and you see that with other qualities as well, like the grey and the blue and the sort of the drip lines on that, you know, there's more depth than just a sort of a plane, even if the shape is geometric, that it creates an interesting in terms of how the light reflects off and things like that. So it's nice to have that.
It's an intuitive thing, I think, too, Rita. Some of them had different colour lines at certain points, and I changed them because it didn't hold it together enough. Maybe it's the warmth as well that is attractive. I'm not sure. It's an intuitive kind of decision, that one. Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, thank you. It's been very informative, and very much enjoyed hearing about your work. And thank you very much, Ben. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much, everyone.